Hello, I'm Senator Rod Grams, and welcome to the June edition of our Washington Report. You know, for the last century, the United States has been an economic world leader, yet as we head into the next century, we find ourselves dealing with an increasingly competitive global economy. Now, one would think that during this time of economic opportunity, our leaders would rise up to that challenge in order to open markets to American products, the best products in the world. But unfortunately, some in Washington want the U.S. to shrink from its challenge and revert to the outdated practices of isolationism. Now, if this trend continues, it will be bad for America's farmers, job creators, workers, and for consumers. Now, when I'm home in Minnesota, the message I hear from farmers is very clear: accept the challenges of the global economy and open world markets to Minnesota's agricultural products. They understand that we don't live in a vacuum and that their success rests largely in their ability to sell products overseas. And that's why I continue to work for free trade. Now, my guest on today's show understands the importance of free trade. He is a leader in the Senate in promoting policies that ensure America's farmers and companies are able to sell their products to the rest of the world. And he is Senator Chuck Hagel from Nebraska. Senator Hagel, welcome to today's show. Thanks for taking time to join me.
Rod, really a delight to be with you. Thank you for having me.
And also, Senator Hagel is also a graduate of Brown Institute in Minnesota, where I also went. But
yes, a proud graduate, I might add, and that's pretty good. They have two United States senators in the Senate. Well, more than they deserve, probably.
Or whether we deserve, but thanks again, Chuck, for being here today. You know, as we head into the next century, I mentioned that the U.S. has to work within an increasingly complex global economy, and unfortunately, as we know in recent years, Congress seems to be moving away from what could be a free trade mentality within this global economy and toward, like I mentioned, isolationism. What accounts for this movement, do you think, toward this view of isolationism?
Well, it's a serious problem, I think, and you framed it up well, Rod. It's a result, in my opinion, of a false premise that we have lived with over the years, that we are the one dominant nation on earth. And international competitiveness and all the other dynamics of change that are occurring, and that rate of change is occurring at an accelerated rate, I think, like the world has never seen before. So we're having a problem absorbing that, understanding that, appreciating that, and then applying a policy and a direction and a focus on engaging it, on dealing with it. And I think mixed up in that brew is a certain amount of protectionism, a certain amount of, I refer to as insulationism, a certain amount of uncertainty about the future, and also a certain amount of unfamiliarity about the issue. And let's face it, there are not a lot of people in the Congress who know an awful lot about these issues, and without that knowledge base and that experience base, then we are ill-equipped as a body and somewhat reflective of the nation to deal with this with policy. Now, I've always believed that we in the Congress rarely lead. Society leads, as you and I both know, and culture leads and demands of our country and our people. Our people are far better equipped to understand the issue than we are, generally, and far better equipped to deal with it, because most of them have been on the front lines of dealing with it. So we're kind of coming in from behind on this, but I think we'll get there.
You know, it's always sanctions, and it seems like sanctions are the weapon of first resort rather than being a weapon of last resort. And as you mentioned, in a global economy, the United States doesn't have the preeminence that it had at one time. I mean, sanctions might have worked 40 and maybe 50 years ago, but we even saw when President Carter was in office with the grain embargo on the Soviets. That didn't work because the Soviets turned around and bought grain from Argentina and from other countries around the world. So today, in our global market, and as you said, other countries are producing products as fast as we are, but if we put an embargo against, say, the Chinese or some other country, they'll just turn around and buy a different product from a different country. And so sanctions no longer hold the same weight that they did, say, 40 or 50 years ago. And as you mentioned, our policy has got to change. Not that we don't agree with some of the concerns, human rights, religious persecutions, freedoms, etc., human rights, but this isn't the way to attack them.
No, you and I agree on this, and you and I have linked arms challenging that premise over the last year and a half, and you've captured it exactly right, in my opinion. Number one, it is a new day in the world, and you mentioned it in you're right. And number two, sanctions will not work unless you have your allies with you. And even then, it's questionable. The other part of a sanctions process that has always concerned me is that you essentially isolate countries when, in fact, you should be engaging countries. People become more dangerous when they're isolated. And this Pakistani thing, along with India, is dangerous, and it's complicated. We know that. I don't presume to know all the answers. I don't. But I do know that if you further erode or help erode the economy of Pakistan, that pushes Pakistan the wrong way. And with a desperate people, they do desperate things. And so sanctions are very dangerous, and I am hopeful that with a lot of leadership that you and I have provided and other members of this body, that we're going to be able to turn that philosophy, that culture around and attack this from a different perspective.
Now, we both come from, rural states. Large agricultural, agribusinesses involved in our states. In Minnesota, it's better than 25% of our economy is based on agricultural products, and about a third of those are exports. So you can see any kind of a dent in our export market, or if we put any sanctions dealing with trade embargoes, etc., it goes right back to the field and the main streets of our small towns, and it really does have a major impact on jobs.
Well, that's right, and our numbers, percentage of our economy in Nebraska and jobs and job-related growth are about the same as Minnesota's on exports. So we, like most states, are very attached to and rely heavily on exports. That is the future for our country, trade, opportunities and rate of growth and a better living standard for all peoples, not just the United States, but all peoples of the world. And in fact, when you pursue these sanctions policies, we lose markets. You mentioned the Carter days when we lost so many markets that we've never recovered. We'll continue to lose those. It only is self-defeating in its policy and hurts our exports. And these things back right up to everyday America. They go right back to the back porch of every American. And you can talk about esoteric underbrush kinds of things, but overall the American people intuitively understand that their future is attached to a global economy, and whether you like that or not, that's what we're living in. So our policies have to change to address that.
That's what I mean. You can't really hook trade with this anymore because it's counterproductive.
It is.
And when you look at, and I've talked to many of my farmers back in Minnesota, and when you talk to them about IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the Asian crisis, and they know what that means in relation to the Asian markets. A third of our agricultural products are exports. A big market for us is the Asian Rim. Also, when you deal with MFN, that's most favored nation trading status, and that deals with China, but it deals with every country in the world. All enjoy MFN, so it's nothing special. But I mean, farmers know this, business people know this. So it really is, when you boil it down, it's very important for jobs, the economy and the growth of that economy in those job markets. So throwing you a softball here, why is free trade so important to Nebraska and Minnesota, but basically not just our states, but the country as a whole? Why is it important for you and I to continue working to find avenues to open markets, open different markets in the free trade aspect?
Well, to define it down in its simplest terms, it represents the future growth of our country. It represents everything as far as opportunity, standard of living, economies, tax bases, expansion of all the things that we need to expand to develop our culture further and give more people more opportunities, and that then ripples out across the globe. There's something else that gets lost in this, I think, as well, Rod. The security and stability of the world is fundamental to market economies. Security and stability in parts of the world so that these emerging market economies can develop and start absorbing Nebraska and Minnesota's exports. Without security and stability, that won't happen. So that's another aspect of this, another dynamic of trade, of free trade, that sometimes gets lost in the debate. When you stabilize a part of the world, you secure a part of the world, that means there's less conflict and more opportunity for that part of the world to take Minnesota and Nebraska's products.
What do we do in the alternative? As like I mentioned, it seems like trade sanctions, the old school of thought, is always the first response rather than the last. We've got to really be looking in our different committees, Foreign Relations Committee, et cetera, working with the administration to find alternatives to putting trade sanctions, because they really don't work. We've held hearings, and we've had many experts that said just point blank, sanctions do not work, but yet there's still the first line of defense. I think, as you mentioned earlier, we really need to begin looking at ways to find other avenues of voicing our displeasure without hurting, our very economy.
Well, I've always believed that one of the ways you get at this is pretty fundamental to relationships, individual relationships, any kind of relationship, and that is work from a mutual interest common ground. What are our mutual interests with China or with India or Pakistan, anywhere else? And engage those individuals so that you bring, a country like America does bring some leverage through trade, through commerce, through technology, through mutual interest common denominators, where that then gives us not only the bridge to cross, but an extension of that bridge to try and leverage behavior that we don't accept when we, and properly so, say that human rights are important, God-given rights are important, and the debate should be about the best way to do that. The debate should not be a false debate like you and I see around here. If you do not support sanctions or the religious persecution bill, then obviously you don't care about religious persecution, or you don't care about human rights. Well, that's just nonsense. I've yet to find a United States senator who's for religious persecution. Maybe there is one. I haven't found him, but that's what we have to do.
Right, and I know I've talked to many of those who head up missionary activities, say in China or other countries around the world, and they come back and report to us that a lot of this is counterproductive, and he has given instructions, I know, to some of his missionaries when they hear about this type of legislation, that the word goes out and says, duck your heads. And basically that means keep a low profile, because the tensions are heating up because of what we're doing. So a lot of good intentions, and I'm not saying that a lot of these senators who are proposing these are not well intended. I think they have some very heartfelt concerns, but many times I think it is counterproductive. Would you agree that in some of these instances, say as religious persecution, human rights violations, actually have the opposite effect of what they really are intended to do?
Well, it is a fact that, in my opinion, that they do in most cases, and like anything, we should reach out and hear from the people who actually have to deal in that kind of a real world. To your point, there are many religious people and missionaries who tell us exactly what you said. My goodness, if you do this to us, you cut off our link. We can't get our Bibles in. We can't get our message in. We can't work as we are working now. Leave us alone. Can we do better? Of course we can do better, and we must do better. But we also have to be smarter how we do this. To your point about the intentions of some of our colleagues on this, absolutely, they're pure intentions. But I always say, let's get over that arc, and let's get to the other side as to what the objective is here. Is the objective just to pass a resolution? Is the objective a good headline in the paper the next morning that Grams and Hagel are strong defenders of human rights? And then what? And we actually complicate the world. So yeah, it's complicated, it's complex. Nobody has a good answer, but I think to continue to negotiate and engage and work and process and find those mutual interest buttons that help everybody, and you work with your allies in this. The geopolitical, military, economic power structures of the world are shifting at such an incredible rate that it has consequences for us, and we've got to get out ahead of those shifts, because alliances are important and working with our allies is important. And by the way, we don't have to give up our national sovereignty to do that, not at all.
I know Senator Richard Lugar has got a bill that I'm a co-sponsor of. I think you're sponsoring it. Many senators really, when they vote on it, don't realize the impact. Maybe don't have enough information to know, if I vote for this sanction, what's it going to mean for our economy, our jobs? What's it going to mean for missionary work in China and other countries? So the bill really is asking that before a sanction would be implemented, that we go to some experts, get a study on it, hold some hearings, and to find out what will be the impact or what will be the cost. I think this is a bill that needs some real support this year yet.
I do too, Rod. It's a wonderful bill for many reasons, but it's a bill that focuses on reality. It's not on esoterics and theory, and some textbook case thing. It's a real approach. It's essentially a cost-benefit analysis. That's what it is. And in my opinion, we ought to have a cost-benefit analysis done on everything the EPA does and Interior and every federal government. That's a different story, but that's essentially what this does. Before we jump off the bridge, we better understand the consequences of what we're doing. India and Pakistan are perfect examples. We are living with the Glenn Amendment. And the Glenn Amendment, by law, forced the President of the United States to impose sanctions, economic sanctions on India and Pakistan. Not that maybe he shouldn't have, but the fact is there's no flexibility there. I think that isn't going to change much. That isn't going to do much good. In fact, as I've already stated, I think it's going to be rather dangerous for Pakistan, maybe India. But the point is to take that flexibility away from your president. Whether you agree with his policies or not is one thing, but to take that away and give the president no ability to maneuver is a pretty dangerous way to conduct foreign policy and trade policy. So your point on Senator Lugar's bill is right, and I would hope that we can get something done this year.
And I think just to leave our viewers, with the message that we are going to continue to look for avenues to get the message out that the U.S. does strongly oppose human rights violations, religious persecution, etc. But also at the same time, we've got to find an avenue that isn't counterproductive to those activities and also to our economy itself and the jobs and our job providers. We have to take a break right now. We'll be back with Senator Hagel to talk more about the Kyoto Protocol Treaty dealing with our global climate change right after this.
Vince, that new dummy cam is great.
Yeah, it'll sure give people a whole new outlook on what it's like when you don't wear a safety belt.
I think they'll get the picture.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
He protects all living things in the forest. But he can't do it alone. Please don't play with matches. Put out your campfires. And never, ever forget the words of Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
And again, thanks for joining us on our Washington Report. Again, my special guest today is Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska. And Chuck, thanks very much again for being with us today. I want to talk a little bit about the climate, or global climate situation, the Kyoto Treaty. I think most people are aware of what it is. To give a little more information, but you served as part, heading up the Senate Climate Change Observer Group, and that was to the Global Climate Summit that was held in Kyoto, Japan. We also had on the floor of the Senate what's called the Byrd-Hagel Amendment, and that sent a very clear message to the administration. There was a lot of concerns and doubts. 95-0 was the vote against the protocol, or what we knew about the Kyoto Agreement at that time, or the proposals. Maybe you could bring us up to speed. You're the expert on this, and exactly what is the Kyoto Treaty about? What does it really entail, and what does it mean to American consumers?
Well, I'm not sure I'm an expert in it, but I have found myself thrust into the middle of this, so
you're thrown into it.
Yeah, I'll do the best I can. But what this is about is the Kyoto Protocol that was approved in Kyoto, Japan in December under the framework of the United Nations Working Group, including all United Nations member countries. Was to come together with essentially the protocol representing a treaty focused on what has been referenced as global warming. And what global warming means is an excess man-made greenhouse gas emission challenge or problem in the vernacular of the United Nations. Greenhouse gases, for example, like nitrogen oxide, or the biggest one, carbon dioxide, CO2, and there are a number of other gases. Point being that there are some, and this is all a product of Vice President Gore's environmental efforts that he started a number of years ago, and the theory goes that our Earth is warming at an increasingly rapid rate. And it is warming because we have an excess in man-made greenhouse gas emissions. And the consequences of that warming are going to be devastating, they say, because the polar caps will melt and islands will go underwater, and western Nebraska will become the west coast of the United States, which is all absolute nonsense. And any measurement you take of this by past science and geology and climatology will show you that any part of that theory is absolutely wrong. But what has happened and why it's so devastating in the United States, if in fact we'd pass it, and the President will not bring it to the Senate because of Hagel and because the Senate would soundly defeat it, is because it has an economic component to it, and as you and I both know, it's really not an environmental treaty, it's an economic and energy treaty, because what it does, it severely restricts energy use in the United States, and essentially would just do away with certain energy types.
A lot of industries and a lot of jobs.
Industries, jobs would go, and it hits hardest on agriculture, because as you and I both know, agriculture is a very energy-intensive industry. We use fertilizer, and we use diesel fuel, and all the bad things that has done so much bad to the earth. And although we are the most productive agriculture nation in the world, feeding so many people, and as more people come onto the globe, we're going to need more of that productivity, it would decimate agriculture, decimate industries, and the only nations that signed the protocol were the developed countries, the 134 developing nations, China, India, South Korea, and others, who are the real problems here, would not even voluntarily sign on. So, terrible, devastating protocol that all of us need to work very hard to ensure, first of all, America understands this folly and this nonsense and how silly it is and how devastating it would be, and make sure that we drive a stake through its heart.
So just like where we say the sanctions don't work, trade sanctions globally, because of everything else that goes on around the globe, at the same time to put the United States under these really restrictive measures and not the rest of the world would mean that we would be limited into what we could do, and the other countries would have carte blanche.
That's right.
On what they would be able to do as far as manufacturing, et cetera.
It would directly impact our international competitiveness on products. Some of the things that I've already mentioned. It really focuses on our national sovereignty. Do we really want the United Nations bureaucrats coming into a farm in Minnesota and Nebraska and testing your soil? And by the way, this is all in the protocol. This is actually in the appendixes and the chapters of the protocol. Agriculture is a big part of it. Saying, no, you have to shut down, Mr. Farmer, Mr. Rancher, because you have too much fertilizer on that patch of ground. Our national defense. We do not have a blanket exemption for national defense in this. That means, well, we can maybe fight a war on Monday, then we stand down Tuesday and Wednesday because we're emitting too many greenhouse gases, and then we'll resume war on Thursday. It sounds crazy, but that's what it is about. Not thought out. The economic consequences have not been at all even remotely touched upon by the administration. The science is unsound, at best contradictory. We do not know. Nobody's opposed to a good environment, clean environment. Again, it's like some of these other things. I mean, I don't know if there's a senator that serves with us who's for a dirty environment, dirty water and dirty air. Might be one. But this is just folly, what we're trying to do here. And it wouldn't even come close to accomplishing what it would intend and does intend to accomplish.
They got one thing: you could buy pollution credits. Says that some country that wasn't manufacturing right now but had 100 credits, so U.S. industries could buy those in order to keep jobs here and to keep the industry, but we'd have to pay maybe billions of dollars, so it's a transfer of wealth. So American consumers and businesses would have to pay other countries to allow us to continue to operate. Again, this is just a madness. If we don't have this as a global agreement where everybody shares in the effort, then the United States should not be alone in what's being done.
No. Well, you've just articulated very clearly one of the crazier features of this. And the administration touts that trading scheme as one of the great accomplishments of this protocol. Truly, I mean, they thought they just hit a home run when they were able to come up with that. Well, of course, who is not going to agree to that? Right. Because it is literally a transfer of wealth from the haves to the have-nots, is what was
from the United States to third world countries.
To China.
That's right.
Or India, or South Korea, Brazil.
We have to take another break right now. We'll be back and talk more with Senator Chuck Hagel in just a moment.
Your approach is looking good, Cobra.
The men and women in the National Guard and Reserve face some tough challenges when they serve. Challenges that teach them discipline, leadership, and technical skills that make them better employees. So when they need time off to serve, don't make their toughest challenge approaching you.
My hero? Isaiah Thomas. Kevin Costner. Mr. Wong.
These are teachers, but to the kids they've reached, they're heroes.
My hero? Mrs. Wooten. If I don't get through to that child, who knows, maybe no one else will.
Teachers have the power to wake up young minds, to be heroes, to make a difference. Reach for that power. Teach. Find out how by calling 1-800-45-TEACH. Be a teacher. Be a hero.
And again, welcome to our Washington Report. Senator Chuck Hagel, our special guest today. And again, Chuck, thanks for being with us. Just a quick thing as we close out on the global climate. It could be very detrimental. We all know we have to work to, continue the efforts to continue to improve the climate, the environment, etc. The administration, as you mentioned, has not submitted this to the treaty to the Senate. It is still working to try to get other nations involved. They do have another chance in Argentina yet this year at another hearing or another meeting.
Yes. They are hoping to bring on some developing countries. They may get some. They'll never get China. They'll never get the big ones, and that's who we need. China, within 10 years, will be the largest man-made greenhouse gas emitter in the world. Right now, it's number 2, and those are the countries that we have to bring in. Those are the polluters. We're doing quite well in the United States. Since the 70s, we've cleaned our act up.
But when it comes to prices on products, everybody's got to share. I mean, it's got to be a level playing field, or our workers are going to be at a tremendous disadvantage, and we're going to lose thousands, if not millions, of jobs.
Well, the AFL-CIO and other people who have done studies on this and come up with economic models project anywhere from 2 to 5 million job loss within the first 5 years. That's devastating, and whole industries being wiped out or moving to Mexico because they don't have the standards or somewhere else.
We want a good treaty, but we want a fair treaty.
Yes.
Senator Hagel, thank you very much for joining us on our Washington Report. Thank you for taking your time to watch. We'll see you again next month. Thank you.